All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our March DAG monthly meeting here. It's a pleasure to have you with us. As we're not in person and we can't all say hi to one another, we appreciate you. If you're so inclined, jump into the chat and throw a name in there. Tell us who you are and what brings you here today, so that we can all know who's in the room. We will be in the room, as Marcia will tell us, for some upcoming events, but please tell us who you are, what brings you here today. Um, as we jump into our program this morning, if anyone has any events, exhibitions, upcoming advocacy items, other interesting things, please put your hand up as a participant so that I can call on you and
Mhm.
you can turn off your or turn on your mic and come say hi and tell us what you got coming up on the calendar. I'll get started with one. If I don't see any folks from the Community Design Collaborative on here, but they asked me to share an event that they have coming up this weekend. They are the Community Design Collaborative is preparing their John Stewardson Memorial Fellowship in Architecture Advisor or Accessory Dwelling Unit competition. So an ADU competition. And as part of that process, they're doing a mandatory design charrette this Saturday, March 29th from 10:30 to 3:30 at the Center for Architecture, which is at 1218 Arch Street. So they need some experienced design professionals and other professionals adjacent to come serve as volunteer advisors to help out with that project. So I'll just read a little bit here.
Mhm.
During the charrette, participants will develop and refine their ADU concepts, and advisors will play a critical role in guiding them toward thoughtful, innovative, and feasible design solutions. Each volunteer will support an average of 10 groups for approximately 10-minute sessions, offering expertise in one or more of the following areas: code and zoning, residential design, and sustainable systems. So if you're interested, I'm going to throw a few links in the chat for how you can sign yourselves up and get involved in that.
Mhm.
Um, and then from there, go help them out, do what you can, and tell anyone who you think would be interested to get involved there. I'm just going to drop this one as well. So that's the Community Design Collaborative. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Are there any other items? Keep them coming, please. One thing I will talk about before we get in is some advocacy work that DAG has been involved in. Uh, DAG has been focusing on the ongoing planning and next steps for Market East. We've been meeting with elected officials and other folks in the planning space, talking about what is a good process and a next step forward. If you're interested in what we've been advocating for, we've been talking a lot about a ULI advisory services panel, which is a national program that allows us to shine a light on a specific topic. Because while we are certainly having our own specific troubles here in Philadelphia, a commercial corridor in need of significant redevelopment is not a new situation across the country. So we think it would be a really good way to set the table and bring folks to our community as a way to kick off a planning effort. Not the whole effort, but a kickoff of the planning effort, bringing some really critical folks to the city to meet with a ton of local stakeholders and build some consensus and some ideas around what's the best way to move forward as we enter 2026. So we're going to keep pushing on that, and we'll be continuing to advocate for a sound, good process in the planning process for Market East. If you're interested in getting involved with DAG's efforts on that, you can email dagfellow@gmail.com. I see we got a hand. Ariel, do you want to
Sure, I'll jump
unmute and
in.
share with us?
Hi, Eli, and everyone. Good to see you. I am currently working on a historic preservation advocacy campaign to save a very important historic property in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. It was home to two 20th century female scientists who lived in a romantic friendship, if you catch my drift, at the time. And so it is significant also architecturally. It was designed by William Price, who has many commissions in Philadelphia. And it also contains the region's first automobile stable, known today as an attached car garage. So I'm going to put a link tree in the chat. And my contact information if you would like to help me convince the Lower Merion Township Board of Commissioners that this house is very worthy of designation on their historic resource inventory. Thanks.
Thank you. Back in the days of our various task forces, Ariel was a key member on our preservation task force. So Dagsters never stray far. So thank you for sharing all that, and please send us all of it as well, and we can make sure to share that on our social channels. One other item before we jump in, continuing on the Market East train, is what happens on Market East in 2026. There's been limited conversation about what that actually looks like. Center City District has done a ton of work and is planning a ton of work in terms of making sure the space is safe and clean, which is a really critical it's a really critical, important piece of making anything successful there. But beyond that, there needs to be some more activation in order to have a successful 2026 and continue to shine a light on that corridor. So DAG is working with a bunch of folks to develop some plans and get after it and try to work with the city to support, fund, and organize some programming and other interventions that will happen on Market East. So again, dagfellow@gmail.com if you want to get involved in that planning. We're hoping to release a little more information on what we're planning and how everyone can join us in creating that plan. So more to come on that. Not seeing any hands right now. Marshall, why don't you jump in and share with us some upcoming events at DAG?
Okay, thank you, Eli, and hi, everyone. I've been told that when tourists land in Philly, they head first to the Liberty Bell and then to the Reading Terminal Market. Sometimes it's in reverse order, which doesn't surprise me. So we were thrilled when Annie Ullman, CEO and General Manager of the market, agreed to join us next month. That will be an in-person program on April 17th at 5:30 at the Center for Design, Philadelphia. Just as the market is a feasting destination, the Avenue of the Arts is thought of as an arts and culture destination. But then UArts closed. It couldn't happen, but it did. Shortly after, Lindsay Scanapico stepped forward to save two of the iconic buildings. One of them is Hamilton Hall, the Greek-style temple, and she would be developing them both as arts buildings. Lindsay will be with us on April 23rd at 5:30 at the Center for Design, Philadelphia. It'll be a great opportunity to meet her in person and to hear her plans. And Council Member Gautier will join us in person on May 14th at 5:30 to review the West Park project. And on May 28th, Angela Brooks, the city's new housing leader, will be meeting with us. There's even more, but later. Thanks, Eli.
Yes, thank you, Marcia, for all that you do to help us get all of this together. So April 23rd, May 14th, and May 28th, you're going to have to pencil in on your calendar. Can't yet sign up for them because we are finalizing details, but they will be up on our website very, very soon in order to get a head count of who's going to be there. But are tremendously excited. Angela Brooks is the second in our series of had Jesse Lawrence come, the director of planning and development, and then we're going to wrap it up later this year with Octavia Howell, the director of the City Planning Commission. So that three-pack is a really wonderful set of one-on-ones that we're very excited about. So go sign up. You don't have to sign up for an in-person event, but it does help us get a head count and know how many bottles of wine to buy. So please sign up. And we will see everybody in person April 17th for our next event. So Before I pass it over to my colleague George Claflin to get us into our program today, I do want to remind you um, these DAG events are being recorded. They're all on our website going back to early pandemic. So if you go on there, click on the links, they'll take you to YouTube recordings of all sorts of content. This one as well will be recorded. So if you want to share it with anyone, give us a few days and then go back and look and it'll be there. We'll also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So as a question comes to you, throw it in the chat. Our panelists are pros at picking these questions up on the fly, but George will also be tallying up and making sure we answer as many of them as we can. So with that, George, thank you for helping host and take it away.
Thank you, Eli. We first became aware of this study through our colleagues at the Pew Trust, and who suggested that we might want to do a program on it. And I think it's very interesting to say that as housing becomes, housing policy and housing programs become more city-centric by the policies of specific cities, there is relatively little study of that outside of each of the cities that is investing in this. And so we are very lucky today to have Tobias and Edward with us, who have studied one aspect of the housing policy in the city of Philadelphia as outsiders. And we're doubly happy to be able to hear from them in person. So we rarely get these studies in the first place, and we rarely hear from the authors. Just a few things about housing. Very complicated discipline. There are many inputs that we all think about: land, construction, soft costs, financing, energy, taxes, maintenance. And this is one of the reasons why addressing housing policy and addressing difficulties in housing is always elusive. We are very fortunate this week that the mayor has announced a major housing initiative for the city of Philadelphia that involves almost $2 billion, $1 billion of which is the land. And that's the context, the city context of what's going on. The audience here we're a little different than a typical DAG program, which tends to be design centric, in that this is policy centric. We have, of course, our usual DAG stalwarts. We have several government officials and former government officials. We have policy consultants. We have representatives of the development community, and I believe we have some academics on here today. We will attempt to aggregate the questions from the chat, and please feel free to use the chat at any time during the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters. First, Tobias Peter is the co-director with Ed of the American Enterprise Institute's Housing Center, and he focuses on housing risk and mortgage markets. He has co-authored a variety of reports on housing policy, specifically on federal policy and housing demand, home ownership, housing finance risks, and first-time home buyers. He's certainly testified before Congress and been published in many publications, including the Wall Street Journal. He has a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard and a bachelor's degree from the College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. Ed Pinto is a senior fellow, co-director of the AEI Housing Center, and he was for many years the vice president and chief credit officer for Fannie Mae, which is really one of the pinnacle institutions of government housing policy in the United States. He's also the creator or co-creator of the wealth building home mortgage, a home mortgage designed to build equity much faster than the normal 30-year loan. And he too is widely published, in both the professional and popular press, including American Banker, The Hill, Real Clear Politics, and the Wall Street Journal. He also oversees the publication of the AEI housing market indicators. And he's a lawyer. He has a JD from Indiana University and a BA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I hope that you'll feel free to mention any other qualifications that I have somehow skipped, but I want our audience participants to understand that you're well qualified and that you live in this policy environment. Thank you.
So I'll start, George, and thank you for this, and thank you, DAG and the leadership of DAG for inviting Tobias and me to make this presentation. I've been involved in housing finance and housing my entire career, which dates back to 1974. I started out as an attorney at the Michigan State Housing Development Authority in affordable housing, subsidized housing, and was general counsel there for quite a number of years, and then had these other positions. George mentioned some. I joined AEI in around 2008 informally, and more formally in 2010, and co-founded the Housing Center in 2013. I would just add, you were talking about events coming up. I will be in Philadelphia next Wednesday. Sure I got the date right here. Yes, next Wednesday, the 2nd, speaking at the ULI Housing Product Council, which I think runs from 9 to 11 a.m. I don't have the link to it handy, but you may know about that group. But I'll be talking on the same topic to that group in person in Philadelphia next Wednesday. What I'm going to do is just explain a little bit of how we came upon doing this study, because we get asked that question a lot. How did you stumble on this? And literally, we did stumble on it, or I stumbled on it. And about a year and a half ago, I was reading an article in the Washington Post about rehab tax credits that the Biden administration was considering. And the article said, well, there hasn't been a lot of research done about rehab tax credits, but Philadelphia had done something with tax abatement, and they had a link, and the link was from a New York Times article. I want to say it was from 2003 or 2004. I don't remember the exact date, but it was an old article. Remember, this was in 2023, and the link is to basically a 20-year-old article. And the article talked in glowing terms about this tax abatement program that had been undertaken, both the conversion of commercial and industrial properties to residential, and the building of residential on vacant properties that had been underway in Philadelphia, and spoke in glowing terms about the boom that had engendered from that. I said, boy, this is interesting. A, I've never heard about this, and I keep track of this stuff pretty closely over my career. And B, how does this work? And so I started digging into it and got more and more interested as I dug into it, found lots of other articles. And one of the things that struck me was that it's almost like there was a force field around this, that much of what was going on in Philadelphia never made it outside of Philadelphia. It didn't get studied in particular by national groups or other researchers. There was quite a bit of research that went on within the Philadelphia area and at universities within the Philadelphia area, but that research never made it outside, at least that I could find or that I heard of. And when I talked to other people about this that weren't familiar with Philadelphia, it was all news to them that this had been going on in Philadelphia. And as you'll see from the presentation, what actually the situation in Philadelphia in 1997, in the late 90s, was dire. One quote is that Philadelphia had the highest per capita vacant lot rate of any large city in the United States. And people just go, wow, I had no idea. And we know, what has happened with the tax abatement. So why is this important? Well, as I said, I've been involved in housing and housing finance for 50 years. I actually spent some time when I was at Michigan Housing working in Detroit on rehab there and vacant lots and things of that nature. And I can tell you, as bad as it was in 1974, and it was pretty bad, it's only gotten a lot worse, much worse. Particularly, it got worse after the run-up to the housing crisis made it a lot worse, and then it's just festered pretty much ever since. And that's in direct juxtaposition to what we found in Philadelphia. So we think it's important because there's still many cities, in Detroit being one, where 32% of all the vacant, all the residential lots are vacant. Youngstown, Ohio, it's 50+%. Flint, Michigan, it's 50+%. There are many cities that are in the 20 to 30 to percent range. And therefore, what can be learned from Philadelphia as what works and what doesn't work could have an impact nationally, much like Philadelphia had a huge impact nationally back in our founding days. We also found that top-down, and we will go through some of that, doesn't tend to work. Top-down government programs, bottom-up programs do work, and by bottom-up, we have identified a housing success sequence that broadly defined. It includes the Philadelphia example, but it also includes 25 other cases that we've done, case studies that we've done around the country and around the world. And we basically found that when you have by right zoning that allows appropriate density relative to the value of the land and the potential use of that land that's by right, and you have keep it short and simple land use regulations, you will unleash, if it's economically viable, you will unleash a storm of development just with doing that. And we've done those studies time and time again. And what we found in Philadelphia is that Philadelphia already had in place the zoning. These were, and we'll be focusing largely on the townhome development. We cover all of it, but mostly the townhome development. Those lots were already zoned for townhomes. They didn't have to be rezoned. They were zoned for what we call light touch density. In fact, we were surprised that some of the lots were 600 square feet, and they were building new townhomes on 600 square foot lots because that's what the lot size was. Secondly, we found that the keep it short and simple rules were pretty much in place. And there were some changes, favorable changes that were made, but in general, it was relatively straightforward to get permits and things like that. We also found, very importantly, that these lots, while they were vacant, I mean, by and large, they were vacant lots, they really were finished lots. They didn't have a structure on them. They had curbs and gutters and sidewalks and water and sewer. The developer didn't have to really do a whole lot to finish the lot. It wasn't like taking raw land out in the suburbs. And so there was the potential here. What was holding it back is what we found was that it wasn't economically viable to build new in Philadelphia in 1999 on a vacant lot and sell that property at a market price that anyone would pay. It just wasn't feasible. And the tax abatement changed all that, as we'll see. And what it actually did was the tax abatement lowered the market rate line. So we went from virtually nothing being built in Philadelphia. And again, we're talking townhomes and some single family detached and some duplexes and triplexes, mostly townhomes, went from virtually nothing being built pre-2000 to a upswell of tens of thousands, ultimately, of homes getting built over the next 20 years. It was an amazing change, all because the tax abatement lowered the market rate line where you could actually build at a profit. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tobias.
Yeah, thank you, Ed, and also let me echo thank you to the DAC group for hosting us. I am going to share this presentation, and I hope everyone can see this. If not, please someone speak up.
It's visible.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, we're gonna dive into Philadelphia's revival and particularly focusing on the impact of the 10-year tax abatement program that was put in place in 2000. And Ed mentioned already a bunch of these case studies that we've been doing. If you're interested in them, on the lower left of this page here, you see the link to where we have all of our case studies, including the Philadelphia one. What was the challenge back in the early 2000s for Philadelphia? And Philadelphia really faced a bleak future. It had depopulation, urban blight, and strained city finances. And if you're taking a long-term view, if you're starting in from 1950 to the early 2000s, Philadelphia had lost about a quarter of its population. And at the same time, it had lost over 200,000 jobs. And what was curious, though, was that from 1980 to 2000 was that while Philadelphia was declining, its surrounding suburbs were growing. And so that provided opportunities with the tax abatement to shift population back into the city. And here is an example of what it looked like in 2000. We're 25 years from then, but people tend to forget how bad it actually was. And in 2000, there were about 30,000 or more vacant lots. There were about 35,000 abandoned cars. Crime was on the rise, and it was just not a very pretty sight to be in Philadelphia, especially downtown Philadelphia. Here are some more pictures of vacant parcels or entire blocks that were vacant or abandoned. And here, when we look at the map in 2003, which is the earliest we can go with our data on vacant townhome parcels, you can see that especially around Center City, around Fairmont, and kind of in the southern part of North Philadelphia, there were actually a lot of vacant townhome lots. And in some census tracts, it was actually that at least half of these townhome lots were vacant or abandoned. So it was a massive problem that was happening, as you can see, pretty much throughout this large greater downtown area of Philadelphia. So then there were some changes were being made in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And one of them was the Center City's revitalization that was put in place, the Center City District. And we think that may have played a major role, but St. Louis also shows that broad renewal is possible without a Center City-based renewal approach. Ed already mentioned the New York Times. There was also in the late 1990s, homicides started to decline. And then in 2000s, you started putting the tax abatement, a 10-year tax abatement in place. There was also in 2001, the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative, the NTI. It was a $300 million program that was aimed to demolish 14,000 vacant buildings and to clean up many of the vacant lots was being put in place. But our conclusion from the NTI is that it failed to spur even moderate construction and renewal in 3 out of the 7 targeted neighborhoods. And that's because, as Ed said before, this was a top-down approach versus the 10-year tax abatement was a bottoms-up approach. And there was also the Philadelphia Land Care Program that started in 2004. And again, we don't think that played a major role, but if there's any interest in this, we're happy to answer any questions. We have done a lot of work on these programs. So let's dive into the 10-year abatement. And you can see from the chart, when you look at the population right around when the 10-year tax abatement was implemented in 2000, Philadelphia's population started growing again. And as Ed already said, this program was successful because it was made by right. It was implemented citywide, had a very long period without being any changes being made. And it followed a KISS, the keep it simple, stupid principle. And it changed the economics that it made home construction feasible. And as Ed said, it lowered the market rate line. The expanded 10-year tax abatement made urban projects more competitive, and it shifted new housing construction from the suburbs to the city. You can see that from the top right, where we are tracking the total number of permits, single family and multifamily, from the 1980s to 2023. We're comparing Philadelphia to its suburbs, so Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties. And you can see from the 1980s to the 2000s, the Philadelphia was always lagging behind its suburbs. Then when the tax abatement got implemented in 2000, we see a run up in permits, and Philadelphia was running about even with the surroundings. But then particularly coming out of the great financial crisis, you can see how Philadelphia City, because of this was a bottoms up approach that unleashed many small scale builders, they were very quick to jump in these new opportunities that were created. And you can see how Philadelphia started sprinting away from its surroundings in home permitting. When you look at the lower right picture, you can see the median price per square foot of gross living area. This is for a single family detached townhomes, condos, and duplexes. And this is only limiting homes that were built before 1980. And what we found is, again, if we're comparing Philadelphia County to its surrounding areas, we found that from 1994 to 2000, they were moving around in lockstep. But then as the tax abatement got implemented and Philadelphia started to revitalize, home values on older homes that were built before 1980 started to increase and sprint away from the surrounding areas again, which led to a lot of wealth creation for existing homeowners throughout Philadelphia. This tax abatement made Philadelphia competitive, as I said before, and you can see that here when we track the total migration net flow into the surrounding suburbs. And the top right shows that. You can see before the tax abatement, Philadelphia was always experiencing quite a significant outflow to the suburbs. But then starting in the 2000s and after, once this program got underway, we saw there's still an outflow, but that outflow has been much, much more muted. And so the Philadelphia started maintaining or drawing back people that otherwise would have moved into the suburbs. At the same time, as we've been producing this study, there were many people that pointed out to us that, well, Philadelphia prospered because it drew in a lot of people from New York, wealthy folks from New York. And to some extent, that's true. There were some folks that were moving in from New York City. You can see that in the lower right chart, where we're tracking the net migration into Philadelphia County by inflow and outflow counties. And there were some on the lower left, the green bars that show there was an inflow. Yes, there were people coming in from King County, from internationally, from Queens, from Bronx, from New York. But all that inflow is being dwarfed by the outflow that happened that went into the suburbs. So we don't think the inflow from New York was a particularly big driver. We think the story is more that Philadelphia started the hemorrhaging of people, especially middle class and upper class folks into the suburbs. So as this tax abatement got underway, you can see here an example. A lot of these vacant parcels, they started getting filled in. Here's one example from South Philadelphia. And then here's one from the Kensington, Frankfurt area, where we have an entire block that was in 2004. You can see dilapidated, vacant parcels, collapsed roofs that eventually by 2023 look completely different, where we have filled in a lot of these townhomes, repaired homes, and all this was made possible because of the tax abatement. This tax abatement started radiating from City Hall further out over time. And you can see that in the lower right panel chart, where we're showing the new townhome construction over from 2000 onwards. And kind of similar to the tree rings, you can see that this development started in those areas closest to City Hall. And then each time period, you can see how this development started moving further and further out. And it started revitalizing more and more neighborhoods in the process. And the reason why it started from City Hall is because that's where home prices where land prices were highest, and where developers was easiest to build to make a profit with the tax abatement. And then as these neighborhoods got filled in, these developers started moving further and further out in search of new opportunities. So what got being built. And over this last 25 years, there are about 60,000 units that got built. About a third that were townhomes, a third that were small and mid-sized multifamily, and about a third that was large multifamily. But if we're looking at the number of buildings that got built, we're seeing huge differences. And you can see that from this map here, where we're showing where the housing construction occurred. In the upper left, we're showing the townhomes that got built. And you can see these townhomes are spread throughout the city, but primarily, of course, focused on those areas around City Hall. The small and mid-sized multifamily buildings, there were about 1,000 of them compared to about 18,000 townhomes. You can see they were in similar locations, but they are much sparser. And then finally, if you look at the lower map where we're showing the multifamily, the large multifamily buildings, there were only 59 of such buildings that got built. They were very much clustered around the downtown area, the greater downtown area. But you can see that the lion's share of the development that helped fill in these vacant parcels was being done by townhomes. And in the process, of course, Philadelphia became more livable. And just taking one example here, looking at the number of supermarkets or superstores in Philadelphia. In 2000s, there were a low of about 77 supermarkets in Philadelphia. As more townhomes got built and more people started living in Philadelphia, they had a need for groceries, and grocery stores are by definition very low margin business. They thrive on having lots of people to drive their volumes. And as a consequence of people moving into the area, supermarkets followed. And today we have about 150 supermarkets in Philadelphia, almost twice as many as before. And as I said before, the city became more livable. Of course, it's hard to prove causality here, but with this natural experiment where we're contrasting the greater downtown Philadelphia area to Camden City, we think we can provide a counterfactual where without the tax abatement, what Philadelphia might look like today without the tax, had it not enacted the 10-year tax abatement. And, put yourself back in the shoes in 2000. 2000 Philadelphia, as I went through, was in the doldrums, as was Camden. And if you're looking at this natural experiment here, we are trying to define an area of Philadelphia that is as close to Camden as it is back in 2000. And you can see that area, that's the area highlighted in red on the maps up on the top right. It consists of South Philadelphia, Center City, Kensington, and the southern part of North Philadelphia. And when we look at the characteristics of this area and compare to Camden City, we find that, yes, of course, the population in this greater downtown Philadelphia area was greater and the population density was a little bit larger. But in terms of the townhome percentage, you can see from the lower right table, it was almost identical. The same with the median household income, almost identical. The same with median contract rent. Rents were almost identical. Property values were almost identical. And crucially, the vacant lot share that existed back in 2003 was also almost identical, with 15% in Camden versus 14.4% in greater downtown Philadelphia. So we think this provides a good natural experiment, and Camden is the counterfactual what would have happened to the greater downtown Philadelphia area had it not enacted its tax abatement. And just from a first blush, you can see from the map that there's a huge difference between Philadelphia and Camden. Philadelphia here on this map lights up like a Christmas tree, as Ed likes to say. These red and pink dots, they show you those are buildings that got built since 2000. Versus in Camden, you see these dots are very, very sparse or hardly existing. When we look at the outcomes, we see that from 2003 to 2023, the townhome vacant lot share in greater downtown Philadelphia declined by 3.4 percentage points to 11%, versus in Camden, it continued climbing from 15% to 23%. If we look at the median sale price per square foot, we see that in greater downtown Philadelphia, we had a 7-fold increase. In Camden City, we only had a 3-fold increase. In terms of population, greater downtown Philadelphia had a 13% increase in population. Camden continued to fall, fell 10%. And in terms of median household income, in greater downtown Philadelphia, we had a 177% increase. In Camden, we only had a 55% increase. And so there was very stark differences in outcomes. And apart from the ones that I mentioned, there were also many positive externalities, including greater stability in home values in the aftermath of the great financial crisis. We have lower crime in greater downtown Philadelphia, greater vibrancy, and an improved fiscal position of the city. And most, if not all of that, we attribute to the tax abatement program that was put in place in Philadelphia versus Camden, which did not have this bottoms-up tax abatement approach. Camden actually tried a top-down planning approach that failed miserably. And I think, kind of if you look in the newspapers, you see it led to widespread corruption in Camden. In Philadelphia, we are not aware of any corruption that occurred because of this tax abatement program. So this whole thing was a smashing success in our opinion. However, there was opposition that started to form based on some of the misconceptions. And one of the misconceptions was that builders and developers make outside profits. And these builders and developers, the truth is that they could not be building without the tax abatement. It was just not feasible back in 2000. And hence the tax abatement changed the economics where it was feasible. But also when we look at the people that built these these townhomes, we're finding that many of those were built by small scale builders, not the large builders in general. And you can see that here from the chart, when we look at the Philadelphia County number of construction establishments by firm size. And going back to 2000, you can see that the number, the establishment that had fewer than 5 employees, that doubled in size versus these larger firms, they roughly stayed similar. But in the process, of course, this tax abatement, as these 17,000 townhomes got built, that created many, many jobs and economic opportunity for people that took the risk to become home builders. Misconception number 2 is that these townhomes are not affordable. And what we're finding is that these townhomes, first of all, they enable sustainable homeownership and wealth building. When we look at the homeownership rate, which you can see on the right chart here, the homeownership rate on these townhomes is about 65%. The homeownership in the large multifamily buildings that also got built in primarily around the center city, there the homeownership rate is about 8%. And I think Philadelphia prides itself on being a homeowners town. If you want to maintain that homeownership, you can only achieve it by building townhomes, not by building large multifamily buildings. These townhomes are also very family friendly. You can see that from the numbers again, that the percentage of families living in townhomes, it's almost 70%. In these large scale multifamily units, it's only about 20%. And of course, you have more families living in these townhomes because the units are larger. They have on average about 3 bedrooms versus the large multifamily buildings have only about one bedroom on average. So that makes it much more feasible for families, but also there was some story in the Philadelphia Inquirer that asked, well, why are we no longer building rentals for families? And the answer is, well, because you don't need to, because you're building townhomes. Newly built owner-occupied townhomes are also relatively affordable, particularly when you do it on a per bedroom basis. And here we have numbers where we show from the American Community Survey that shows that these townhomes, these newly built townhomes, are valued at about $400,000. But they have 3 bedrooms, so if you do the math on a per bedroom basis, it's about $140,000 that they're valued at. The large multifamily the large multifamily units, rental units, they are more expensive, and especially in the per bedroom, much more expensive. And the same applies to the contract rent. If you do the contract rent on a per bedroom basis, these are actually affordable units for families, which is why a lot of families live in them. Misconception number 3 was that the construction of new luxury townhomes on parcels throughout the city led to displacement of longtime poor Philadelphians, especially those of color. And first of all, we point out that the new townhomes that got built on vacant parcels. So if you're building on vacant parcels, by definition, you cannot displace anyone. The second thing that we point out is that this replacement was of vacant, decrepit buildings. And I already went through on the prior slide, but you can see here when we look at the townhomes that were in existence before 2000, so the older stuff that was built, we're finding that it's roughly the same number is still in existence today. So none of these older townhomes got torn down and replaced. We really were building on these vacant parcels. And when we look at the minority percentage that are living in these older townhomes, we're finding that the number actually slightly increased. It went from 49% to 62% on owner-occupied townhomes. And on the rental front, it went from 71% to 79%. So again, it's not true that minorities got displaced by this construction boom. It's rather than the minority share in these townhomes that existed before 2000 increased. And the same argument we can make by looking at the time that people lived in their homes since they moved in. And again, we're finding, if we compare 2000, before this tax abatement got underway, to today, we're finding that there's very little difference in how long people have lived in their homes. If this new construction led to widespread displacement, we would expect that today the people that are living in these townhomes would have moved in much more recently. But that's not the case for both owner-occupied and for renter-occupied units, as you can see from these two charts. And then if you also look at Black lower-income residents, we're finding the same thing, that it did not lead to widespread displacement. On the other hand, this tax abatement program, because it revitalized all these neighborhoods, it had a substantial wealth effect, and that wealth effect accrued to all the homeowners, including to many minority homeowners. And when we tally it up, we find that it created about 22 billion of additional wealth for all homeowners. 10 billion of it incurred to minority homeowners, many of which, of course, were Black in Philadelphia. And so if you owned a home that got built, a townhome that got built before 2000, you literally hit the jackpot. And of course, the argument is, well, your home values went up, but you have to pay more in property taxes. And to some extent, that's true. But also, Philadelphia had many programs in place, and those programs got expanded, where they increased the homesteading exemptions and put in place new programs that made sure that older, lower-income residents could afford the homes that they've always lived in. Misconception number 4 was that it was taking money away from city services and schools while benefiting only the rich. And again, we are finding that that's not really true. The relevant question is not what the city did not collect over 10 years because of the tax abatement, but rather the property taxes that the city did collect due to the tax abatement. And if we show that, we're finding that there was a massive increase in property taxes paid on properties built between 2000 and 2024. And of course, initially, over the first 10 years of the tax abatement, the city is receiving relatively little in additional taxes. But as these properties roll off the tax abatement, once they hit year 11, they're being taxed at its full rate. And by 2024, you can see that the city is earning almost $200 million from buildings after the tax abatement had expired. And over the next 10 years, because there was such a large construction boom, that number is going to grow to over $400 million. And I should also make the point that the city, in the process of maintaining more of its population, and it had a substantial increase in revenue from other taxes, and that's all widely known. So the recap is that while there was a significant reduction in the vacant lot share, there's much more work that remains to be done. And this work is particularly happening needs to be done in the southern part of North Philadelphia and to some extent in University City. But we also think that recent policy changes will have many unintended negative consequences. And for example, recently, the Philadelphia halved the tax abatement program in January 2022. It imposed a new 1% developer tax, and it launched the $400 million Neighborhood Preservation Initiative. All of this, we think, is not going to lead to a significant increase in home construction. And the reasons for that being, as we've said before, if you evaluate the $400 million Neighborhood Preservation Initiative that was launched in 2021, which was a top-down approach, we can see this was done in a couple of neighborhoods, but some of these neighborhoods, Juanita Park, West Oak Lane, and Winfield here, we've plotting, and you can see that hardly anything got built in these neighborhoods because it was a top-down approach that did not rely on the market forces. So in the process, a lot of money got wasted that could have been, that would not have needed to be spent. And instead, if the city could have continued with the 10-year tax abatement program, more and more of these areas that are still vacant today would have been filled in, of course, radiating out from city center. So what should the city do? And it should, of course, learn from the past. The 10-year tax abatement has been very successful, as I've showed here. The Neighborhood Transformation Initiative, it really failed to revitalize many neighborhoods, and the same on the land care program. So in terms of current policies, there was this new initiative that the mayor recently announced, but we similarly think, like these other programs that have been announced, that it will fall flat. And it will fall flat because it is generally a top-down approach that has not been successful in the past, and it's going to be spending up to $2 billion, which is actually, once you factor in other subsidies that need to be put in place in terms of other money to incentivize builders to build, and especially rental subsidies, it could cost up to $350,000 per unit. The total cost could be $10.5 billion in total. And instead, what the Philadelphia Tax Reform Commission has proposed, a 20-year property tax abatement for conversion of office buildings to residential. We think that's a much more promising path forward, but that should be extended to residential construction on vacant lots. And in terms of the path not taken, where would this new development take place? Again, there's still many vacant parcels just outside of that red circle here. And though we think if the tax abatement were to be reinstated, the original tax abatement, and potentially increased to 20 years, these areas between the red and the black circles, those would be the next one that would see revitalization, and hence an increase in livability and an increase in property values that would benefit existing homeowners there. It is actually possible to build market rate townhomes for middle and working class families in Philadelphia. It's by all estimates that we've seen, and we've looked at all these townhomes, you can build these new townhomes for about $350,000 to $400,000. That price point is attractive to middle-class families such as teachers, fire, police, trades like electricians and plumbers that earn about $90,000, and they are buying at a price point of about $375,000. So if you were to reinstate this tax abatement and this development move further out, it would create new housing options for working class and middle class families. And with that, I'll stop here and turn it back to Ed if he has anything to add.
I think we're ready for the questions. I've been keeping an eye on them as they go through. Maybe if I could just answer this condo question first, just to get it out of the way. So yes, condominiums are a way to lower the market rate line. However, and I can't speak directly to Philadelphia, but nationwide, because of liability laws relating around condominiums, that were changed around the country in many areas, the number of condominiums built has collapsed because of builder liability laws. That and we won't get into that. That's a whole nother session. But the fact is, it has collapsed. Second fact is, where condominiums have been built, there were relatively few of them built in Philadelphia as a result of this. And how do we know that? Because the buildings that have, and I don't remember the exact number, Tobias, but the buildings that have 50 or more units are virtually all rental. And those can be rental for one of two reasons: either because the building itself is rental, it has one owner and all the units are rented, or it's condominium form of ownership, but the owners of those units, individual units, then rent them. In either event, they're rented, they're not owner occupied. So our research shows the only way that's feasible to support home ownership in Philadelphia through new construction under current circumstances is building townhomes, and to a lesser extent, because there are very few single-family detached lots. Philadelphia is a row house city, is to build row houses and some single-family detached. Any other questions you want to, are you going to go through the questions?
Yes, there's a lengthy question just came on that's kind of interesting. Alexander Palma, 10:57 a.m. Rather than read the whole question, you may want to just skim it and comment on it.
So what role does demographic and behavioral shifts reversing the 50+ year population decline leading to increased housing demand play in the story? I mean, as the New York Times started reporting very quickly, population in downtown Philadelphia decline reversed almost immediately after, but first the turn on the lights upstairs effort, which was the conversion of office buildings and industrial spaces to residential, but basically downtown or near downtown. And then, of course, the new construction that took place starting in 2000 with the tax abatement. When we were in Philadelphia for a couple of days, a couple of months ago, to talk to people about our findings and what they experienced and what they, their reactions were, we talked to some people that had moved into places back in the late 90s, early aught years, and they recall it was pretty dicey. And what we found, this relates to another question about schools and things like that and crime. And there's a group of people called, when I was first became a homeowner, called urban pioneers. And they would move into places that were a little dicey in order to get the amenities that came with that. And Philadelphia had a lot of amenities in terms of walkability, closeness to downtown and jobs downtown, and all of that. And the amenities would grow over time, as Tobias mentioned, with the they had more grocery stores and things like that. So people are willing to take a bit of a gamble that if they get in early, that things will turn around. This has happened in city after city after city, and then you get, crime starts going down, and it takes an effort to do that. As far as the schools are concerned, I don't know that the schools have been a major positive factor in Philadelphia. I'm not an expert at that, but my guess is a lot of the people, might not be using public schools, or they don't have children in some cases. Again, the townhomes are going to have families and more likely to have children. What age the children are, again, I'm not sure. But again, this is a process that takes place pretty much on its own once you can put in place a process for building new. These people that were doing this, they thought there was a market. I don't know whether the city realized there was a market or not, but when they adopted it, but their goal was to increase or reestablish the middle class in Philadelphia, which had been hollowed out by the deindustrialization. It was a middle class that had worked in the shipyards and worked in the factories, and they had middle-class jobs and middle-class salaries. And that had all collapsed since the 1950, basically. There was a process, and they needed to reverse that and bring middle class back and make the pie bigger. That's the way it was described by mayors back in the late 90s and early aught years. And we think they were successful in that.
Ariel Harrod has asked two questions that I'm going to try to link a little bit. One of them says questions that the abatement has increased demolition, and it seeks comment on that. And I mean, my thought would be that increased demolition is a prelude to construction. In the private demolition costs money, so it's being done with a purpose in mind. But
I meant like full demolition permits of existing properties, not demolition, not like a partial demolition permit.
okay, oh, I see.
On that,
But the second part of her, the second question is very interesting, is a change in taste culture caused by immigrants. And several others, I think, have asked, who is the market? Where's the market of the home buyers? Is there a cultural shift going on here as well?
So on the first question, again, the evidence, Tobias, I think, went through it. We find no evidence. If you look at the homes that were occupied in the 2000 census, which meant they had to be built before 2000, and then you look at the number of people who were living in homes built before 2000, and the number is unchanged. That's telling you weren't demolishing occupied homes. You were demolishing derelict homes. We don't know exactly how many of those were being done. We do know the transformation initiative, the goal was to demolish 14 or 15,000 homes that were derelict, that were unoccupied. However, they didn't, I don't believe they equaled their goal. I think they might have stopped at 7,000 or 8,000, which is not a trivial number, but in the context of all the vacant lots that there were in the first place, there was many thousands and thousands of vacant lots. So again, the data we looked at shows no evidence that there was displacement of people who in 2000 were living in townhomes and other residences in Philadelphia were displaced by this process because the number of units stayed the same before and after that were built before 2000. So you weren't demolishing existing that were habitable units. They had to be derelict units that were being demolished. Do you want to talk about the second question, Tobias?
Yeah, so the second question was about immigration.
I think there was immigration, something about a white savior.
Actually, Ariel was also responding to Steve, who raised that question too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean these new townhomes that are being built, I mean they are, they're not unaffordable. I mean they are not. I mean they cost a certain amount of money. I think that the median price is about $500,000 today, and it's possible that you can build at $350,000 at a $350,000 price point in if you're building smaller townhomes in areas that have still lower home prices. So that's feasible. But in order to afford a $350,000 new home, you need about an income of $80,000 to $90,000. And that's when we look at the people that have been buying in Philadelphia County over the last year. That's what we're finding, that the people that are buying at that $350,000 to $400,000 price point, they have household incomes of about $80,000 to $90,000. So kind of to the extent that some immigrants, to the extent that they're highly skilled, have good jobs, high-paying jobs, they can afford it. But to the extent that you have lower income people, they're not gonna be able to afford a new home. And it's not, but that's also not the goal for someone of very low income to afford a new townhome, right? If you're building new townhomes at a $400,000 price point, someone, kind of like a teacher or a firefighter or police or nurse, they're going to be selling their old home and moving into that newer home because it's a newer home, it's larger, it fits what they need. But in the process, they're selling their older home to someone of lower income. And through this process of filtering, we are actually getting people of lower incomes into housing that they otherwise could never afford. And you see it in the new and used car market where, in the car market, we're building plenty of cars for the middle class buyers, but no one is buying new cars for very low income people because older cars just filter down. And until everyone who wants a serviceable car in this country has a serviceable car. And we think the same would happen in the housing market if we were just to build more housing for the broad middle class, then older housing would filter down to lower income people, and that would be affordable to them.
Tobias, if you could turn on slide 65, is that easy to do?
Yes.
Slide 65 basically says what the townhomes that got built from 2000 to 2022, what is the household majority percentage? 38%. That's less than pre-2000, which is 62%, but it is, 38%. What's the average age of householders? It's 46, which is substantially lower than the pre-2000 at 56. What's the average household size? About the same, 2.5 and 2.5. What's the income? 155 versus 62. What's the property value? As Tobias said, 420 versus 200. Number of units, there were 10,000 units that were tracked in the ACS. That's a sample, so the numbers can move around. When you look at the renter occupied, of which there were a substantial number, that was 73% minority versus 79 for the new versus the old. Age was about the same. Family size was substantially larger, 4.1 to 2.7. Again, this provided renter apartments that were family sized with the townhome construction, and this demonstrates it. Median household income 26,000. Again, the ACS numbers can get a little bit dicey when you're slicing it pretty thinly because it's a small sample. And the contract rents were 1,400 versus 900 and 4,500 units. So again, we think this is good news, not bad news. Is it perfect? No, but I would add that one of the things that the mayor's new proposal, the $2 billion proposal, when we looked under the hood, 90% of that housing was going to be for individuals at below 80% of area median income. And that basically means that they need ongoing housing subsidies to make those, quote, affordable at below 80% of area median income. And that is an incredibly expensive approach in addition to the $2 billion. And the $2 billion is just part of the capital stack because they're talking about low-income housing tax credit money. They're talking about CBDG money and all kinds of other monies, state and local. And then they're not mentioned is the housing subsidies, the monthly subsidies that are needed, because these are still very expensive buildings, even with all of the subsidies. They cost a lot of money. And bringing those down it requires monthly subsidies. You put all that together, this is an incredibly expensive program. By the way, very few of these people will be homeowners, yet one of the leading statements in the mayor's statement was this is going to promote homeownership. Well, when you look at under the hood at where the money's going, very little of it goes to homeownership, to support homeownership.
Bruce Morey of the PCPC staff, the Planning Commission staff, has asked a question right on this focus also, indicating that it looks like the best you could do with new construction would be to serve people with 80 to 90% of AMI, the local area median income. And then anybody below that, we have plenty of people in Philadelphia who are down at 20, 30% of AMI. They're not candidates for home ownership, but they have a housing problem. And we have certainly lots of effort from the Philadelphia Housing Authority. But can you say something about what happens to the large number of people we have that are, say, below 50% of AMI? And also, just parenthetically, I would say the AMI in the Philadelphia metropolitan area is highly skewed highly exaggerated because the suburban counties are included when it is calculated. If you took an AMI based on Philadelphia alone, it would be much lower.
So let me start on that, and then Tobias can jump in. Again, when we look at past efforts, which Tobias went through, starting with the NTI and subsequent efforts, and which are top down. We look at the top down approach. I think there was a question about, well, did Camden have tax abatement? Camden did not have tax abatement in the form that, in any form, but particularly in the form that Philadelphia had. The state of New Jersey sold, I think, $1 billion or $1.5 billion of bonds, and had a top-down approach, and it was so corrupt that finally the indictments came down about a year ago against the people. This was a 10-year-old program. It was in 2013 or 14. It took a long time to find out all the scandals and stuff, but that was in the news a lot last year, and the people that were brought were charged with corruption in that program. But you look at what happened in Camden and what they said was going to happen. They talked in glowing terms about all this stuff was going to happen, and none of it happened. And again, you look at the past experience in Philadelphia, the only program that we've seen that works and generates both wealth for Philadelphians and generates revenue long-term for Philadelphia is the use of this tax abatement program. And then you use other tax relief, as Tobias described. You change the homestead exemption. Philadelphia had 4 or 5 different programs to ameliorate the impact of rising property taxes that did, I think, a pretty good job of doing that. And then you figure out how you build from there, but you have to solidify what's going on in Philadelphia. You can't start, I think, with saying, oh, we're going to try to figure out in a very expensive fashion how to provide housing for people at 30% and below area median income. I don't think the Philadelphia Housing Commission has had a tremendously successful effort over the last 20 years in terms of the quality of housing and the upkeep of the housing and the expense of the housing and where it all is. We think you put your eggs in the basket that has proven to work, and you then do the other things to fill in, but you start with this big effort, which is based on market. You can get a lot more done with that, and then you fill it in with some of these other programs, not the other way around. Tobias?
Yeah, I mean, there's still tens of thousands of vacant parcels in Philadelphia that could be built on, and the private sector has shown to be able to build on those. And if you add another 20,000 housing units over another 10, 15 years, eventually that's going to help. It's going to filter down to lower income people. And it's going to keep a lid on what rents, the rate that rents are appreciating. And it's going to create new opportunities for lower income people too. It's not to say that for extremely low income people that the market would necessarily provide, housing, but you can subsidize those folks through vouchers. But that's a better approach than spending all this money, these $2 billion to build housing that in the end may not get built, but it's still very, very expensive housing.
Alexander Palmer introduced the issue of historic preservation tax credits, which are certainly particularly relevant in a city with as much historical property as Philadelphia. And he also has a comment that maybe I could ask Alexander to clarify. He says that he understands that you would be pro tax cut, but how about when different types of tax cuts clash? And Alexander, are you referring to a possible clash between having historic preservation tax credits versus other types of credits, and who would benefit, or is that the issue? No, I'm not sure.
I mean,
I'm not sure Alexander's still on, and But
I
it's
mean,
a
Yes,
very
yes,
interesting.
that's a good summary. Go ahead.
What did you
Okay.
mean by clash, I guess is the question.
Well, I mean the old I guess dispute traditionally in Philadelphia between new construction and preserving historic buildings.
So I think something we didn't mention, but it bears mentioning, and we didn't mention it because it's hard to track, but as best we could tell, it was not a super big portion of it. But the 2000 tax abatement was broader than what we described. It not only covered new construction on vacant properties, it also was applicable to and I'm going to use the term remodeling because I think that I forget the exact terminology that was used in the ordinance. It didn't cover maintenance and stuff like that. You had to be doing, but I don't want to use the term substantial rehab either. I think it was more like remodeling, which could include substantial rehab. And any amount that you spent on that, it would not, and that increased the value of your property, that you would not pay any taxes on that also for 10 years. But again, it's hard to find that information in the records that we were looking at, particularly the public records that we were accessing. On the other hand, we think that what did get done in terms of the new construction, we think it swamped the other, but again, we had a hard time zeroing in on that. But again, that was eligible. People could do that. Now, as far as the specific historic preservation tax credit, I don't want to get into that too deeply. There's a federal historic preservation tax credit. These things tend to be done by developers and syndicates and things like that, and because of the way it works with the IRS and all of that, and they tend to be a very top-down type of approach, very different than the bottom-up approach that tax abatement, be it for remodeling and rehabilitation or new construction of residential, very different from that approach. Tobias, anything to add on that?
No, nothing to add to that. But there was another question from Alexander about a lengthy question in terms about, well, a lot of this development was driven by national trends, particularly after the .com bubble and the economic recovery that followed. And other cities saw similar recoveries without tax abatement, and that our comparison to Camden is not applicable because they are too different. And the trajectories of the cities were always going to be different. And finally, that the tax abatement has always been unpopular in Philadelphia, not because of the misconceptions we list, but because it increased the tax burden on Philadelphia's already living in place. So let me say one thing about it. And there was one slide in the deck that I didn't go through in the interest of time, but that is relevant here. And I mean, I've already said that in 2000, Camden and greater downtown Philadelphia looked very, very similar. But even if you go back, you can see here, if you track the population trends, the population declined in Camden from kind of significantly by 30%. In Philadelphia, kind of the same trajectory between Camden City and Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was able to turn it around while Camden's population decline continued. And we attribute this in large part to the tax abatement. And any national trends would have also applied in Camden, but nothing happened in Camden. It continued its decline. And kind of I think this picture tells it all. If you look what got built in Philadelphia versus hardly anything in Camden. But to the last point about the misconceptions or kind of shifting the tax burden to Philadelphians, I mean, it's true that the taxes went up, but as I mentioned before, there were many homestead exemptions that made this feasible. And what the city should have done is use this new property tax money that was coming in after the tax abatement expired, and shifted that around more to buy more buy-in from residents. And but the city was awash in cash, and they figured out ways to spend it on neighborhood preservation initiatives and other sources. And at the same time, the revitalization in Philadelphia created $22 billion of additional wealth that would otherwise not exist. I mean, if you were to, and 10 billion accrued to Black, mostly lower income Philadelphians. I mean, I think that's very important to point out as well, that this program created a lot of wealth that people could tap into if they wanted. They could just sell their home and now have, an additional $100,000, $200,000 that they otherwise would not have had they lived in Camden. So in that regard, I think it's a little unfair to kind of swipe up the benefits off the table and only focus on the negatives.
I'd like to.
Let me add to that just to say that Palisades Park, New Jersey is where I grew up and where we first started thinking about what we call light touch density. And Palisades Park, New Jersey allowed duplexes and two family. They actually got done as condos, but that's a whole nother story. But the zoning allowed that from 1939 on when they first adopted it. And I lived in Palisades Park. In fact, my parents moved from Palisades Park because the property taxes were too high, and we moved to the next town, Richfield, which had much lower property taxes because it had the power plant that served the whole county. But that was before all of this conversion to duplexes occurred in the late 80s. And once that conversion took place, the property taxes in Palisades Park went down to the point where they're now the lowest of any of the towns in the vicinity. And that got buy-in from the residents to keep the process going of conversion to duplexes. Tobias mentioned this, what I think a mistake, as we look back, that the city council and the mayors over time made was they didn't say, well, look, there's going to be a lot of money coming in from a lot of different sources. And again, we have all kinds of studies that show how much money was coming in. It's not just property taxes, all the various taxes that Philadelphia has, and they were coming in at tremendous levels of revenue. And the school board was getting their share. Believe me, we have charts on that. Just in the interest of time, we couldn't show all that. But they could have said, oh, we're going to see that all this revenue is going to come in. We're going to take a proactive stance and say, we're going to ratchet down the property tax rate for everybody based on the fact that we're getting all this extra revenue, which they were getting extra revenue. That's one thing they could have done. Instead, they did it through one-offs with, well, let's expand the homestead exemption. Let's exempt people over 65 who had this. Let's exempt people who had an increase of greater than this. Instead of lowering the rates, everyone could see the benefit that was happening from this economic development. They did a lot of one-offs. Secondarily, and maybe even more importantly, they could have lowered the wage rate. And that wage rate, which is applicable to both residents and non-residents, we understand from our discussions with people in Philadelphia, is something that really stops and hinders economic development in Philadelphia. Again, we're not experts on this particular thing, but the way it works, and it's a pretty high wage rate. I think it's 4%, 4.5%, depending on resident, non-resident, and that has an impact on Philadelphia. They could have taken the money, which Tobias showed the growth in revenues. They could have taken that and used it to ratchet down and said proactively, we're going to lower that wage rate because that's really a disincentive for economic growth in Philadelphia.
I want to try to connect questions or comments from two activists and longtime members of the housing policy community, David Feldman and John Cromer. David Feldman asks, do you think that the tax revenue coming on now from earlier projects is the difference that is helping to fund the mayor's housing initiatives, while John Cromer is somewhat critical and says the tax abatement helped finance many housing preservation projects and many rental housing projects. Why focus on vacant lots and homeowner housing only? There's more to John's comment, but I'm just going to stop there to match those two comments.
On the first one, I've lost my train of thought. What was the couple words on the first question? His first question, couple
Oh, the
words.
first question, David Feldman speculates that the new tax revenue
Oh,
from
yes.
the earlier.
So actually, I found an article, and I can't remember, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where the mayor, I believe, or could have been the head of the city council, said, "Oh, we're going to take money coming in from the abated properties that are no longer under abatement. We're going to take in that tax revenue and use it to provide subsidies for other housing purposes." So I remember reading that in an article in I think the Inquirer 3 or 4 years ago. Could have been 2 years ago, but I do remember seeing that. And so I think the answer is probably yes, because again, as Tobias showed, there's a lot that's coming in. Why we're focusing on the vacant lots and new construction is because that's what the market can respond to. And the tax abatement is what lowers that market rate line where you can build and sell at a profit. And to the extent that you can lower that market rate line and take vacant properties that are yielding basically nothing today, forget the properties that are owned by the city that pay no taxes, but we're talking about just vacant properties that are owned by individuals. They are taxed at a very low amount because they're vacant and the land isn't worth all that much. On the other hand, so therefore, giving up taxes for 10 or even 20 years, 100% of nothing is still nothing. It's only when somebody improves it that you actually have a future revenue stream that you can count on. Until somebody builds on it, you have nothing. And if you have to wait 10 years or even 20 years, you're still better off having that construction take place because, as again, we didn't have time to cover, there are sales taxes both on the construction, there's sales taxes on the residents, there's wage taxes, there's corporation, different property transfer taxes, there's all unemployment taxes, all kinds of taxes that are being paid when economic development expands. And it's been demonstrated that the tax abatement program greatly expands economic development in Philadelphia, therefore greatly expands the tax base. I forget what the exact numbers were, Tobias, but for every dollar ostensibly given up in tax abatement, there was what, $1.80 in taxes paid? Was it something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like twice as much from this was Kevin Gillen's study, I think.
Yeah, there was a study out of, was it Drexel University?
John, I just want to get the other part of John Cromer's question on the floor because we're running tight on time. The second and third part of his question, the second part was questioning the appropriateness of the comparison between Philadelphia and particularly Center City and Camden because of Camden's status as being under receivership for a great deal of that time. And then his third point was that much of the opposition to the abatement was based on the fact that it favored wealthier developers in better off neighborhoods. And he claims then for the most part was not related to displacement. I don't know about that, but as you probably have seen from some of the other questions that are percolating here, displacement is a big issue, whether perceived or actual.
So on the second question, again, when you focus on townhomes, these are not large developers. They're teeny tiny developers by and large. We purposefully focused on the townhome development because it was out in the neighborhoods and it was filling in vacant lots and having a very salutary effect on those neighborhoods, as we've described. You know, house prices went up, amenities went up, property value, property values went up, and it filled in vacant lots and blight and all of those things. We focused on that part. Yes, there were lots of large developments downtown, multifamily, largely multifamily, and they're going up the expressway up to Fishtown, the gambling place, a casino, etc. But that's not the main focus of our study. The main focus of our study is how did you renew the neighborhoods? And again, it's a work in progress, but how did you do that? As far as Camden being in receivership, I mean, that's again a top-down thing. The state of New Jersey, I don't know the year, I've forgotten the years. I mean, as I said, I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm a little familiar with this. But that $1.5 billion program that the state legislature passed, of which Camden got a large chunk, the other cities that were highlighted for that money, none of them really were able to reverse the decline that they were having and launch renewal. Again, we look at what was successful in Philadelphia, not that it's perfect, not that you couldn't improve on it, but as compared to other things, both in Philadelphia and elsewhere, as I said, I've been tracking what's going on in Detroit just because of my background for decades and talking to people in Detroit for decades. I've been to Detroit many times since I left Michigan. Detroit has failed. Ironically, we did find that Detroit has a tax abatement program for building single family 1 and 2 unit dwellings and townhomes that's pretty much by right and keep it simple. And it's successful, except that it's limited by state law to a very small areas of Detroit. In those areas, those little neighborhoods, there's lots of construction going on. You go across the street and there's nothing. The beauty of what happened in Philadelphia is what it was citywide and by right. And so that enabled the market to, over a period of 20 plus years, find the opportunities and build tens of thousands of townhomes and tens of thousands of other residences over that time period.
We are at time, and I just wanted to jump in and thank you both. Oh, George has one closing comment. George, why don't you jump in and take us out?
Tobias and Edward, but I also want to thank our audience, DAG members and hopefully new DAG members. This was a classic Philadelphia event of everybody speaking intensely with passion about many issues, not in total agreement, but this is how policy is forged, and I'm delighted that we were able to have this event.
Yes, my thanks as well. I certainly appreciate you guys coming on here and engaging with all the questions and sharing all this information. We will be posting the video of this. It'll be on our web page and our YouTube page in a couple of days. So give it a rewatch, share it with folks, and pass it around, and we can continue momentum from this. We'll
send out the link to the the full slide deck later today, and then you'll have that to distribute.
Wonderful. We'll post that on the event page as well, so folks can grab both of those at the same place. So what we usually do with these virtual meetings is for everyone to turn on their cameras and give these guys a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you guys taking the time and sharing with us. We will be in person on April 17th to talk about the Reading Terminal Market master plan. So please RSVP, let us know if you're coming, and we will see everybody there. Have a good one.
Bye now. Thank you.